Welcome in, welcome in. So let's talk some Detroit Lions. So the Lions lost their first preseason game to the New York Giants, but there were some things to like for the Detroit Lions. It was cool to see Hendon Hooker play again. That's one thing I was excited about because with preseason, obviously these games don't count to their regular season record, right? So you're looking forward to, you want to find something in the preseason you can look forward to. Oftentimes for me, it's watching the rookies. But in this case, I wanted to see Hendon Hooker play football, and it's like he's a rookie because he hasn't played football in almost 2 years. You got to go back to 2022 at Tennessee. He had a really nice season for the Volunteers in college, beat Alabama, and you got to see Hendon Hooker, and he looked pretty good. So this is an interesting article. These are guys that stood out. I didn't see reps when Sione Vaki was in, but it sounded like I watched the run he had. And then his stats finished up 29 yards on just 4 carries, 7.3 yard average, and then talks about the 15-yard run he had where he made several guys miss. So really like Sione Vaki's game. It'll be interesting. It's interesting if he will make the roster. That's unknown, but he's a really good player. Just a good all-around football player. Played both ways at Utah. Played safety as well. So Sione Vaki, I got to watch. Broderick Martin. I saw Broderick Martin getting reps. I didn't know. It said he looked good. I didn't see him. I tuned into the game for just a little bit in the second half, but Broderick Martin, one of those guys that needs to have a big preseason. You talk about a guy that you really want to hone in and follow in the preseason and how he's doing right now in practice, because he's a guy that, number one, sadly might get cut, but he's a guy who, if he has a nice preseason and makes the roster, then he's a guy you're like, with his size and in enough athleticism, he can make an impact on this team, especially in the interior of the defensive line. And also with, like this guy's talking about, DJ Reader's still dealing with an injury, so Broderick Martin, with Reader a little bit question mark, Broderick Martin's a guy you need to have, not just for depth purposes, but also a guy that can make an impact in that interior. Isaiah Williams, too. Isaiah Williams, one of the more interesting guys. The Lions have a streak of 14 straight years with an undrafted guy making the roster, and Isaiah Williams could continue with that. This guy's saying he isn't the biggest receiver, but you watch him, he just gets open and catches the ball. I think 5'10", 186, but I'm watching him, and that's what's interesting. The wide receiver position, like look at a few years ago, there was a lot of guys under 6 foot. There's a lot of guys that aren't the biggest. At the wide receiver position, you can excel not being the biggest, fastest guy. Really, that's what you can boil down the receiver position to. Can you get open? Can you catch the ball? And Isaiah Williams can do those two things. I think the size was the reason he went undrafted. He went undrafted this past draft. But you look at Illinois last year; he was first team All Big Ten, fairly productive. So Isaiah, that's what they're talking about here is St. Brown, Jamison Williams, and Khalif Raymond. Seems like those guys will make the roster. And then you got Peoples-Jones, Isaiah Williams. Seems like, to me, this guy, I don't even know if Khalif Raymond should make it too. I don't know if Williams could make it. I think they could keep Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, and Khalif Raymond. They may have to release Peoples-Jones, but with Isaiah Williams looking good, the Lions you can be okay. St. Brown, Jamison Williams, Khalif Raymond, Isaiah Williams, okay. Donovan Peoples-Jones. You're like, if we have to keep 4 of those guys, okay, we could be pretty confident in those 4 guys. You feel like Rakestraw got some snaps too. I just saw him out there. I didn't see. He said, quote, I made some good plays, I made some bad plays. I didn't see. I think I saw him make a tackle. He was playing some nickel safety. That's what they're talking about. Emmanuel Mosley dealing with an injury. But yeah. 5 players. These are 4 players I like. The edge rusher Isaac Iwuka, undrafted guy out of Mississippi. I haven't followed him too closely, but yeah, I know the four guys. The 4 guys that just touched on: Broderick Martin, Vaki, Isaiah Williams, Rakestraw. Good players in college, and I like their game. That's the question for the Lions. Is Hendon Hooker going to be the backup? There's kind of a battle between the backup position. That's what the Lions' hope is, that Hendon Hooker wins that backup spot. Because that's what I was discussing. You look at Hendon Hooker, if he becomes the player we think, that's a really strong backup to have. And Goff has showed the ability to stay healthy, but you never know. You never know. A guy could get banged up. Goff could get banged up in the second half of one game, like a second half, like the third quarter of a game, and you need a backup you can trust that can come in, knows how to run the offense. If you look at Hendon Hooker and Goff are kind of similar players when you think about it. Taller quarterbacks, guys that have some mobility. Hendon Hooker a little bit more mobility than Jared Goff, right? But they both have enough mobility within a good offensive line to run and scramble. I think Hendon Hooker, he's one of those guys. I'm going to try to make this point the best. He's one of those guys that can make more, can pick up. He can do more with a good offensive line because he's a guy who really, he's not a statue in the pocket, but he likes to kind of settle in and just like almost lock his feet in the pocket when he wants to throw. Like for example, Rodgers and some guys can throw better on the run. Hendon Hooker appears to be able to do that, but that's not necessarily his strength. His strength is in a good offensive line, having some time to sit in the pocket comfortably and really releasing the ball with like that slingshot throwing motion where the ball jumps off his hands. And Goff's similar to that too. Goff just wants to lock in, throw the ball, and the ball just slingshots off his hand, oftentimes completing passes, like deep, mid-range throws. That's why Goff's been so good in the Lions, in my opinion. He has enough, when you have time in the NFL, Jared Goff's one of those guys where when he has enough time, he's got a strong enough arm. If a guy comes open, he just loves to make a living over those over the middle, deeper throws, deep crossing routes, seam routes. That's where Goff wants to make a living. And to me, Hendon Hooker can do that as well. And Hendon Hooker can hit the deep ball too. And he's got more mobility than Goff. So certainly have a reliable, if Hendon Hooker wins the backup job, you certainly have a reliable quarterback. But that's so intriguing with me. The Lions, 14 years in a row, have had an undrafted player make the roster. Isaiah Williams may have a chance. I feel like the fact you keep hearing his name, even though that was an article by that Tim Twentyman, I'm not sure if he's a Lions insider. The fact that you keep hearing Isaiah Williams' name is big because the Lions do need a strong wide receiver 3. You look at most teams that make a Super Bowl run have at least 3 capable wide receivers. I know the Chiefs didn't necessarily, but look at a lot of good teams have at least 3 capable wide receivers. Like when the Bengals made it a few years ago. They had Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins. The Rams were a good team last year. Puka Nacua. They had Cooper Kupp, and then they got good production from Demarcus Robinson. A lot of good teams. A lot of good teams have 3 at least capable wide receivers. I mean, you look at the Niners too. Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, in George Kittle. I know Kittle's a tight end, but he certainly is a capable pass catcher. So I guess you could argue for the Lions. The Lions were able to thrive essentially last year with basically Laporta and St. Brown. I know Jameson Williams made some plays, but he wasn't necessarily consistently productive. So that's the biggest question mark for the Lions. You could argue that's the second biggest issue facing the Detroit Lions behind the corner, other than the cornerback position not developing, is what if they don't have a strong wide receiver 3? So I don't know if I can go this far, but it may be true. Like, you could argue the Lions, if the cornerback position does develop, but it's just Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Jameson Williams, and Laporta, you could argue that's enough, but it might not be. Because against better teams, against better down the road, deeper in the playoffs, some teams would be, okay, we're going to take Laporta, we're going to take St. Brown out of the game. And that could be enough, but also, I guess just the main point I'm trying to hit at is having that third receiver is so key. I go back to the Bengals, right, a few years ago. I think because it was, okay, we'll take away Jamar Chase. Oh, T. Higgins. Oh, Boyd. And so that's just so powerful when you can have 3 certainly capable guys. And the Lions do, I guess they do certainly have 3 capable guys, but 3 capable receivers and a very good tight end, that's where it becomes a lethal combination at that point. So I guess the Lions do have enough. I guess I've talked myself into it, but I'll just leave it at 3 capable wide receivers, certainly so important. And honestly, it is very important for depth purposes as well. And then, we'll keep going along with these key 5 players. Broderick Martin, too. Broderick Martin's a name that people keep throwing out a lot. I think that's a good thing. A lot of times people just keep throwing out your name. It's usually for a good thing. But Broderick Martin could really be big for the Lions. He was a guy that the Lions took a couple years ago, and I didn't really know much about him, but I watched this tape, and I think with Broderick Martin, I think why a lot of people keep talking about him is because he showed ability. I think Aaron Glenn was talking about this. He's been pretty good in practices. But I think he's just leaving a little bit more meat on the bone. I think there's another step that he can take for the Detroit Lions. And especially, this guy hit on it, and this was what I was going to talk about. With DJ Reader banged up, I think that DJ Reader and Broderick Martin, those guys' success is so key, is because having 2 defensive tackle, it kind of goes back to what I was just talking about. It's similar to what I was just talking about. 3 capable wide receivers and a tight end can be lethal. In the same way, 2 really good defense, they have 1 really good defensive tackle in Lee McNeil. We know that. Reader can be really good. They just need him to stay on the field. And then Broderick Martin, sounds like everyone thinks he can be really good. He's just got to take the next step. So 1 really good defensive tackle in Lee McNeil, a top 5, top 6 player, according to Pro Football Focus, in Lee McNeil is good. 2 really good defensive tackles, that could potentially be lethal and really help this Lions defense become even better against the run and even better against the pass, for that matter. So I think that's why they're really wanting Broderick Martin to take another step for the Detroit Lions. So it was a concussion that Hendon Hooker suffered. And then Lions sign a former 5th-round player. Oh, Mahogany hasn't reported to Lions camp. The Lions signed former fifth round pick Jamarco Jones. Wow, I did not realize that about Mahogany. I was looking for Mahogany out there. I saw Giovanni Manu playing. Yeah, I did not know that Mahogany hasn't reported to camp dealing with an injury. Wow. So yeah, they signed Jamarco Jones. He's a former 5th round pick. Yeah, everyone keeps talking about Rakestraw as one of the winners for Lions preseason. Rakestraw is just a really good football player. He was one of those guys each year in the NFL draft. I kind of talk about this. It's just a really good player, but falls to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th round. And when he gets drafted, they're breaking down the pick and they're saying, yeah, this guy's got a chance to be really good. Not sure why he fell. You could make the case he should have went higher. Rakestraw is a textbook example of that guy that just fell farther than he should have in the draft, but got a chance to be, with his attributes and the way he plays and the competitive toughness, he's got a chance to be really good. So, Brandon Joseph had an interception. Brandon Joseph is an interesting guy. Talk about the NFL, staying with the topic of the NFL draft. He was a guy a couple years ago was projected to be, there's a lot of guys, you look early for next year's draft, right? Like we're talking about guys for next year's draft already, even though, because they're like guys like Will Johnson, James Pierce. He was a guy that was projected at one point to be a 1st round pick, I think, and then he transferred, because he had a nice career at Northwestern, transferred to Notre Dame, did a decent job, had a decent season at Notre Dame, I think in 2022, but then I think he slipped all the way to an undrafted free agent. I don't know if it was the Lions initially that signed him, but I guess the main point with Brandon Joseph, there was some hype there. He's had a pretty good career, and he's a guy that's trying to make the roster. So interesting career in that aspect, that he was viewed highly, slipped in the draft, but it's just kind of still trying to make it here in the NFL. So, yeah. For the line, Donovan Peoples-Jones, a guy I want to see more out of. I was hoping he would have come down with that catch in the end zone, tried to go up for a one-hand. That would have been big, at least, to get them a touchdown. They ended up, Lions' final score was 14-3. Peoples-Jones, similar to Broderick Martin, I guess similar and dissimilar is he showed flashes. He showed a couple of years ago, had an 800-yard season with Cleveland, right? But then the Lions pick him up, and he's one of the guys, like we talk about, in the mix for being that wide receiver 3, but you just want to see it. That's the question with Donovan Peoples, like when's it going to happen? But Peoples-Jones got a lot of ability, and you just want to see more from him if they choose to keep him on the roster. You just want to see him be productive, make plays. If they use him as a special teamer, be good in that aspect, be good in that part of the game. So that's what they want to see that from Donovan Peoples-Jones. That's too bad about Christian Mahogany dealing with that illness. Mahogany's a guy that the Lions needed. He's another one of those guys similar to Dennis Rakestraw. Slipped in the draft, and he gets drafted, and people are like, man, this guy, a lot of good traits. Probably should have went higher. Why is he going 4th, 5th round? Did have the ACL missed the entire 2022 season with an ACL injury, but had a really nice season this past year. I guess almost last year in 2023. So Mahogany, really good football player. Excellent run blocker. It's been a while since I watched his tape, but I really like what I saw of him. And he was one of those guys. I talk about this a lot, but I always like I just mentioned, we're watching guys that are eligible for next year's draft. Will Johnson, Carson Beck, James Pierce, Harold Perkins, notable guys that'll be eligible for next year's draft, right? You take a look at some of these guys and you see who you really like, who's going to be good. Mahogany was a guy I liked, and I had him ranked up there with some of the guards I had watched a couple years ago. So I watched him in the summer prior to the season after he declared for the NFL draft. So I'd watched him the summer of 2022 prior to the 2023 season, and I was very impressed. Obviously, Brad Holmes was enough too, and that's why they drafted him. So, and then Giovanni Bernou, didn't really pay attention to how well he did, but Giovanni Bernou is another guy that they're going to need to do some nice things this year. They're expecting big things out of him. I think what's big with Giovanni Bernou is just the adjustment to the NFL. Coming from British Columbia or playing in Canada. People always say that about Giovanni Bernou, the talent difference, the talent's difference in the adjustment to the NFL. Yes, there'll be an adjustment to the NFL. If you can just completely dominate, pancake guys, drive them with explosive. If you can do that at a lower level, most likely you can still do it at the NFL. So that's why I don't worry about the NFL being a huge adjustment for Manu. I think obviously it'll be a slight adjustment for him, but I think if he puts in the work, takes the coaching that the Lions will give him, I think he can adjust to the NFL, and I think he's got a chance to be a starter maybe down the road. But yes, he's certainly a guy to watch for him. Lions rested most of their starters, which makes sense. Guys like Brian Branch, Laporta, St. Brown, Jared Goff rested a lot of those guys. I expect we may see the Lions starters next preseason game, but not sure. I was listening to Goff. It sounded like Goff wanted to be out there. I like Goff as a competitor. I think he is a pretty calm, easy going guy. But I think he doesn't always show like a lot of like fiery rah-rah leadership, but I think he is a very good competitor. Guy that I think that's the feel I get the way he said he wanted to be out there. He wants to compete as often as possible. Lions play the Chiefs next preseason game. They'll take on the Chiefs, then they'll take on the Steelers to wrap up preseason. Saturday, August 27th, and then they will play, and then the Steelers August 24th. Still got Antoine Green too. That's another receiver. Carlton Davis too. I expect big things out of Carlton Davis. Depth at receiver. Quietly better depth at receiver. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jamison Williams going to be the two guys that are going to be absolutely key for them having success. But it'd be interesting to see how this plays out, who makes it, and then once the season starts, who's that number 3 guy? It's kind of the interesting question. Who is the Lions' best player? Penei Sewell, Aiden Hutchinson, St. Brown. It's definitely one of those 3 guys. It is certainly a great debate. I would go Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I think Sewell has a good argument. Hutchinson has a good argument. Even Laporta could really make a claim if he has a big year this year. Even Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that's why the Lions, why their Super Bowl odds are so high, is because they legitimately have 2 elite players, 3 elite players, and then they have behind those guys, they have some really good players. Jahmyr Gibbs, really good player. Sam Laporta, really good player. And then Lee McNeil, really good player. Quietly, Lee McNeil, one of the better defensive tackles in the NFL. Probably the best defensive tackle that no one talks about, if that makes sense. Because people know Aaron Donald. I know Aaron Donald retired, but Aaron Donald was the name people knew. Dexter Lawrence, Quinnen Williams. Like Dexter Lawrence, Quinnen Williams, probably the 2 best defensive tackles in the NFL. But Lee McNeil quietly rising up there and a really good player, super good athlete. So Lee McNeil, really good player. Sam Laporta, really good player. Aiden Hutchinson, Penei Sewell, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Lions' 3 best players. St. Brown and Sewell, probably their 2 best. And then St. Brown, the best player, in my opinion. I think just because St. Brown's been so consistent. And obviously Sewell has been consistent too, but St. Brown just like you know what you're going to get from St. Brown. I think that's why I love the guy is similar. It reminds me similar of Julian Edelman. Julian Edelman was such a reliable pass catcher, just that aggressive dog that's just always getting open, always catching the ball, always competing. St. Brown's that guy. Week in and week out, he's going to compete. He's going to get after it. He's going to catch the ball. He's going to get run after the catch. He's going to be tough. He's just going to be feisty. That's, you know what you're going to get from St. Brown. And you know as the defense, you know this guy's going to give you a problem each and every game. So that's what I love about Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then Penei Sewell. The thing I love about Sewell, a lot of people talk about this. A lot of people say, well, this guy's good. He just can't stay healthy. Penei Sewell, he just stays on the healthy, and he does not like to come off the field. Plays a lot of snaps for the Lions. They took him off the field, I forget for one reason. He was not happy about it. So Sewell not only stays healthy, not just stays healthy, but plays a lot of snaps and does not like to come off the field. Alex Anzalone, another good player too. That's when you become, I kind of just touched on this, but that's when you know you become a good team in the NFL. Difference makers and just a collection of good and really good players. Alex Anzalone, another really good player. Jack Campbell was solid. Jahmyr Gibbs, you want to see more from him this year. Just the one season under his belt, but Jahmyr Gibbs so explosive, and his big play ability it was so apparent in that first year, and arguably he was the best running back in this draft class. I've talked about this before, but that is the ultimate. Brad Holmes drafting Jahmyr Gibbs is the ultimate example of he may have the last laugh. In that draft, remember the reaction at the time. The reaction was Jahmyr Gibbs was in mock draft. He wasn't going first round, right? Most people said if you're not getting Bijan Robinson, you should wait on a running back. You shouldn't take a running back first round in top 12 for that matter, top 15. Brad Holmes did it, and Brad Holmes most likely, it appears, got the best running back in that draft, and he took him in the first round when most people said you shouldn't take him in the first round, let alone the top 15, the top 12th overall. So Brad, that is the ultimate perfect example of Brad Holmes most likely getting the last laugh on people. And that's what Brad Holmes said. You have to put aside the mock drafts. I think that's what's tough about fans relative to the NFL draft, right? A lot of times fans get attached. Other guys have talked about this before. Fans, they do watch tape, they do watch highlights, but they get attached to these mock drafts. Like, for example, if there's a player getting mocked in mock drafts going 15th, 16th, and say they watch like their fan base, and say it's a fan base that drafted, like their team drafts him, and the player can predominantly is mocked to go like 16 through 20 range in mock drafts, and their team took him top 5, top 10. Like, what's in, like, for example, I guess that was the Atlanta Falcons taking Michael Penix. I know that was, people still argue that was, this maybe not the best example because people argue that was a stretch anyways. But for example, like Michael Penix, a lot of people saw him going at late first round, sometimes even like late second. But Atlanta takes him top 10, right? 8th overall. So as a fan base, a lot of times if you're attached to mock drafts in that case, that can be just, that's initial disappointment. That's not the best example, right? Because a lot of people thought that, not just Atlanta fans, a lot of people thought that was a stretch, maybe not the right move. You signed Kirk Cousins to a lot of money. But that's just an example of a lot of times it can be immediate disappointment. I hope the Lions' offensive line is good this year. Taylor Decker, Kevin Zeitler. It's interesting. Brad Holmes had the pre-draft press conference, right? And he was talking about that he felt that they could line up and play their offensive line. And it's interesting, they still took 2 offensive linemen in the NFL draft. My guess is that he talks about he doesn't really pay attention, or he's a guy that kind of mixes in, it sounds like, needs and best player available. But that's how I kind of knew they weren't going to take an offensive lineman first 1 through 3 rounds, but they ended up doing so. I was surprised they took 2. I guess the point I'm getting at is him saying that it's not surprising that they didn't take an offensive lineman in the first 3 rounds of the draft. But the fact that he said that and they did take 2 guys just goes to show that, kind of backs up what I was talking about, that they do feel very highly of Manu and Christian Mahogany. And I know you can make that case that they feel highly about every guy they draft, but also knowing that they could line up and play and they still took those 2 guys just shows that even if they don't play this year, that they're guys that could give them good depth and could play down the road. So hopefully Mahogany, the illness clears up, and hopefully Manu makes that adjustment in the NFL. That's the bottom. Mahogany just got to stay healthy. Hopefully he can work through this illness. I don't know. I shouldn't comment on it too much. I don't know what it is. And then Manu, you want him to take the coaching and adjust to the NFL. But, okay, I'm going to wrap with that, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the Brand Partial Show. Stay tuned for more episodes and clips. Till next time, peace.